how we can make an impact in architecture in a changing world. My name is Jasmine, I'm president of the Rural Society. So thank you all for coming. We hope you enjoy this lecture, and I'll let Joss take it away.
Cool, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for taking your evenings to listen to me talk. It's actually been quite a while since I did a lecture. I think actually the last lecture I did was this one here last year. There's a couple of familiar faces, so I'm afraid you might be listening to some of the same content. But I'm here to talk to you about our practice CAUKIN Studio. We're going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the business journey that we took from being students and running a practice to then going full-time into the world of work. And then also about how our projects hopefully aim to create an impact through architecture. So yeah, as I said, we're CAUKIN, we're a design and construction organisation, and we believe that every human being should have the opportunity and tools to shape the spaces that they inhabit. We should all benefit from the quality of life that's achieved through informed design. And then finally, of course, construction has to reduce its environmental impact on our planet. So that's our kind of method statement or ethos, if you like. Did I just skip 2 slides? I don't know. Quite often in like architectural discourse or in the media, impactful projects or impact through architecture is spoken about how a building, the end product, might have an impact on its end users. But we believe it's actually a twofold thing. You have impact through process and impact through outcome. So by impact through process, we mean using the process of design and then construction on site to achieve kind of skills exchange opportunities, employment opportunities, etc. And to leave potentially even a further and more profound impact long term through the process. And then obviously there's the impact through outcome, so how the space or building itself can provide better educational facilities, better healthcare facilities, whatever it is that the brief of the project is. And we try to achieve this through our kind of 3 key pillars of what we do. So first of which is designing through collaboration, so working with all stakeholders right from the very start of a project, so not only the end users, but everyone, you know, built environment professionals, school kids, local communities, whoever it might be, through the design process, and ensuring that their buy-in and their ownership over the project is heard and is there from the start. And that helps to really drive kind of, as I said, ownership in the project and in the end users in the space in the end. We've then got learning through building. I guess this one kind of does what it says on the tin. It's using construction to create employment opportunities and skill sharing opportunities. We typically hire unskilled local workforce and use the project as an opportunity to train people through construction. And also we believe that as architects or as designers, getting hands-on and learning how to build things is also a really good tool for them being able to design things better as well. And then finally, experience through immersion. So on a vast majority of our projects, we spend a decent chunk of time living alongside the end users that we're working with and for. And we believe that this gives us a much deeper insight into the way in which local people use their spaces, and then means that in future we can then design better spaces for them as a result. And it's also a much better way to get a much deeper understanding of a local context and culture than you would ever normally get if you were kind of backpacking or staying in a hotel, etc. So taking it back to the beginning, when we were students back at university, it's where our kind of journey as a practice started, although back in those days it wasn't quite so formal or intentional. During our second year, we all studied at Cardiff, we're a group of friends who studied at Cardiff Uni. During our second year, we got an opportunity to do a module at the end of the year, which had a bit of a live build element to it. I understand, at least Reading, I think used to, they still do some sort of live build bits, okay. And we built this sort of compost toilet on a site down in Somerset. And it was an opportunity for us to get hands-on with tools, work with local craftspeople, and also, as I said, learn through building and provide value to the design through getting hands-on. And that gave us a bit of a flavour for the construction process and getting involved in construction. And then after that module, we were faced with our second year of summer ahead of us, and a lot of our kind of colleagues and peers were doing work experiences in offices, obviously very valuable experience. But we thought, well, we kind of want to put some of this practical knowledge we've gained into some sort of more practical use, but also still do something that applies to our education. So we started to look for an alternative path to kind of try and realise architecture or design. So we reached out to tons and tons of charities and organisations all over the world to say, look, we're basically a fairly uneducated, unskilled group of architecture students, but we're enthusiastic and we want to work with you to design and build a space that kind of helps further your mission or helps you out in some way. And as it says here, it just takes one yes. So we probably sent well over 100 emails, had a ton of introductory meetings, spoke about a few different projects. There was 2 that we kind of then progressed designs for, and eventually one got built, and that was Playscape, which was our first ever project. And part of the whole first project was about trying to build traction as well. Obviously, as I said before, we had no portfolio of work. We were fairly unskilled architecture students. We hadn't got really that much construction experience. So we had to use the ideas and kind of enthusiasm we did have to try and build traction. So the whole project we were proposing we would fund through a Kickstarter campaign, which you can see here. We tried to get as many contacts and people on board as we could. So reaching out to peers at the university to help us with sort of structural engineering and design, reaching out to various sponsors and friends and family to just chuck 20 quid here into the Kickstarter campaign. And we were actually quite lucky that at the same time, a music artist called Caribou had released a music video in which he got that kind of prop fish you can see there. And he put out on Facebook, like, I've got this prop fish. If you can give me a good reason as to why I should have it, then I'll send it to you. And we said, well, we're trying to build this playground and learning space for a charity in Cambodia. We'd love to make it like the centerpiece of the playground. And he liked the idea so much that he gave us the fish and also donated to our campaign. So it was trying to widen our reach and bring in as much of the network as we could to get traction behind the project. And this is what we built. As I said, it was a play and learning space for a charity called Friends of Koh Rong on Koh Rong Island, which is off the coast of Cambodia, with the fish at the kind of centre of that project. But a big part of it was also, as you see in some of the photos here, working with the kids to come up with designs, and we had like tons of sketches, and the charity sent us photos of all their sketches on like the blackboards, and coming up with some of their ideas, which often are very wacky and crazy, swimming pool on the roof and all that sort of stuff. But it's then trying to conceptualise those ideas and then bring them into what became the final design. Lots of different play elements involved, although you can't see it so well in this photo, as well as kind of enclosed space for teachers to use as well to deliver outdoor educational sessions. But I think one of the things that this whole process taught us was that we had so much to learn from working with local craftspeople, locals who have been building their whole lives, building their houses, building spaces around them. They have obviously an in-depth knowledge of local materials and logistics, and so they know so much about the built environment that within their context, and we could learn so much from that. And we found that there was this nice kind of exchange where some of the limited design skills and design thinking that we had, we could kind of swap hands. So it felt like a really collaborative process that we learned a lot from, but we also felt were able to give to as well. And that was something that we felt we just had to keep doing more of. And I guess this is where it kind of all started. So from there, it was about trying to formalise projects. I mean, that first one was basically a bunch of friends from Cardiff going out there and working with the community to build it. There wasn't really that much structure around it other than the kind of Kickstarter campaign that we put together. There was basically 5 of us, which were the founders of the idea, I guess. But beyond that, there was not really that much thinking to it. So we said, right, okay, well, how can we formalise this in some way, and how can we add structure to it so that we can keep doing this in a more sustainable way, and that we don't necessarily have to fundraise for every project that we do. We don't necessarily have to spend hours and hours on the phone to hundreds of organisations to get projects. So this is kind of the structure that runs through a lot of our work still today. And as I say, this has been refined over a number of years of doing projects. This wasn't just something that we thought up like that. But essentially we have sort of 5 key stakeholders which every project requires. So the first of which, of course, is the end users, people for whom the space is for. That might be a group of school kids in a school in South Wales, or in this photo here, a classroom of school kids in Zambia. We've then got a delivery partner or client, so quite often NGOs, but not always, sometimes government bodies, sometimes even like corporates, who they're basically our client and we'll work with them to deliver the project. It's really important that we choose these wisely. One of the ways in which we can work in a whole host of different contexts is through working with really good partners that have very good understanding of the climate and context we're working within. And that helps us to kind of, I guess, shortcut some of that process. We've then got education and training recipients. So like I mentioned, that might be people that are working on our sites to gain skills through construction. It might be school kids that we're working with to run a school workshop. It might be university students like you guys coming away on our construction workshops. Basically anyone that's involved in the construction process and the education and training around that. We've then got professionals and design specialists, so either highly skilled workers, carpenters, bricklayers, whatever it might be, also environmental design specialists, structural engineers from all around the world, bringing value through their design knowledge. And then finally, us as the kind of, I guess, glue for all of these things is the design and build facilitator. So a lot of our work to date has ranged across these kind of four main typologies, although as we kind of grow and move forward, it's kind of getting more and more diverse. The majority of our projects would probably come under the kind of international development category. We've worked in over 12 countries now with more than 60 completed projects. Education and workshop-based type projects, usually a lot smaller scale around schools across the UK. We've also moved into some sort of art and public installations that start to question social or environmental issues that might exist a little closer to home. And then finally, as we're moving towards now, is more kind of social entrepreneurship and commercial impact. So I'll talk more about that later. But to talk a bit more about the design considerations that we have to think about across all of our projects, no matter what context or climate they're in, I'm going to kind of zip through them and then talk through some sort of examples of some of those projects and putting them into play. So when we're designing, and obviously in so many different climates and contexts, the key considerations start with budget. Often, as I said, a lot of our clients are charities or NGOs, and often we're working to quite a finite budget. It's sometimes a red line pot. It's this is what we've got and we cannot spend more than this and we have to deliver the building for this. So when we're designing, we have to think about making sure that we are accounting for every screw, nail, piece of timber that goes into the design, but also then spatially thinking about, well, how can we combine functions or how can we use space creatively to optimize the brief and get as much as we can out of the budget that we've got available. The next of which is climate. Obviously, as I mentioned, we're working in places that have got cyclones, earthquakes, flash floods, you name it. All of those kind of climatic considerations have to come into play. And this is where we work with a lot of environmental design specialists, some at Cardiff University, which we've been working with for a long time to try and tackle some of these issues through design. So passive design strategies, structural engineering that can then allow buildings to flex in the case of earthquake-prone environments, or in the case of cyclone-prone environments, designing buildings with limited material resources but that can still stand up to those sorts of wind loads. And I think this one's obviously becoming more and more prevalent across all of our work as obviously climate change takes action and the rise in sort of natural disasters is becoming more and more. So it's more and more important to design to try and future-proof some of those buildings. Materials is the next consideration. It's really important for us across all of our projects that the materials we're using are coming from as hyper-locally to site as possible. So whether that's actually from the site itself or being supplied from as close to the site as possible. So we're not necessarily importing any kind of fixings or specialist bits and bobs. It's about using what we've got within the local context and then trying to innovate with that to design for some of those climatic conditions. So I think to date, 90% of all materials used on our projects have come from within 50-kilometre radius of the site, and that last 10% has come from within 250 kilometres. So as I say, trying to keep it as local as possible, and that helps also to reduce the embodied carbon within the building, obviously with lower transport carbon costs. The next one, skill level. As I've mentioned, we're working with a lot of kind of unskilled or less skilled workforce, and so we have to design buildings that are quite simplistic in the way that they're built, but also quite repetitive. That means that we can also build something quite quickly with a relatively low skill level, because if there's a repetitive element to it, it doesn't take long to kind of learn how to build one frame, for example, and then you can repeat that 10 or 12 times, and suddenly you've got a building much quicker. And typically it would take a week to build or learn how to build that first frame, and then within the next 3 or 4 days, you've got all of the rest of them, because everyone's kind of got the understanding and picked up that momentum. Also, when we're working with kind of younger children in some of those school workshops that we're putting on, obviously we have to consider the health and safety elements to young people and unskilled workers on site. So trying to come up with designs where we can build the whole thing with hand tools, and there's not really many complex fixings or kind of heavy lifting to be done, that sort of thing. Time. So a lot of our builds happen over quite a short and sharp period of time. That's partly because it helps to reduce the cost to the client. Obviously, the less time you spend on site, generally the cheaper it is to build the building. But also, a lot of our educational workshops run on a sort of 2-month to 3-month time frame. And so we have to try and get from basically a blank site to a complete building in that time. And that lends its hand to a design typology of sort of prefabricating. You'll see across a lot of our builds, there's this kind of like portal frame type typology, I guess. And that helps also with being able to build things quickly. And often we can have multiple things happening on a site at one time. We've got a team digging and laying foundations, whilst we've got a load of people prefabricating frames elsewhere. And then usually around the kind of midpoint of a project, the heavy lifting comes in, and you have like some holes in the ground and some flat frames on the floor to suddenly a big structure in the space of a day, and it's quite a rewarding point in the project where it all comes together. But as I say, that means we can build quite efficiently and quickly as well. I think might be the penultimate one, so information, or in this case, lack of information. A lot of our sites, and seems to be increasingly so, are becoming more and more remote. That often means that when we are designing, it's done so off a desktop survey of information. We don't really ever get topography surveys, or it's just too cost prohibitive to send a surveyor to the site to get accurate information. So it's often things like drone shots or Google Earth or SketchUp or CAD Mapper. You can download obviously data for the area, but generally that means that quite a lot of that data is not super accurate. So when we design our buildings, we have to kind of plan in flexibility through the design, so that when we get on site, if there are things that are that we haven't accounted for, it doesn't matter so much. We can adapt the design quite quickly to account for that. I mean, the amount of times we get sent photos of a site, and it's like a 270-degree sweep of photos that the charity or local partner has taken, and they've not kind of turned all the way around and missed that there's actually a huge slope behind them, or that we're on the edge of a cliff or something like that. So there have been quite a few occasions where we've got to site and said, hang on a minute, we're going to have to like flip the entire building, or we're going to have to resite it in totally. So it's not proved a massive issue yet. We have had to make some fairly big changes on occasion, but yeah, really important that we incorporate flexibility in design until we get out there. I guess tied into the remote locations and lack of information is also then logistics. As we're working in more remote places, logistics become a big factor to the design. Perhaps a cost you might not think would be that massive. Obviously, a project in the UK, sure, you have logistics costs, but not usually that much. It doesn't often cost that much to get a material delivery from the local hardware store. But in the case of the photo on the far right there, which is in Vanuatu, all of the materials had to come from the mainland to this island where we were building, and they had to all be trucked by a 4x4 up to the site, and that was the only way to get them there. And so obviously that has quite a large cost implication. So planning those sorts of things into the design period is really important. And that means not specifying really heavy members, not specifying really long members of timber, trying to come up with designs that could be a bit, I guess a bit of a kit of parts, so that we can get the materials there in a practical way that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. I mean, this other example here was a project in Fiji where the only access to the site was on a small fiberglass, well, a smaller boat here on the left, through a gap in the reef and then onto the beach. And no big boats could get through there, so all the materials had to be weighed onto this boat and also had to be kind of not too big so that they could be basically chucked off the side of the container into the small boat and then taken onto the beach. So again, quite a difficult logistical consideration that you might not have thought of during the design process, but some of the things that we have to kind of factor in. So I'll talk now through a few of our projects as kind of key examples of some of the things I've spoken about. So this was a maternity centre that we completed in Uganda back in 2022, I think it was. It was a project that was in an area where maternal mortality rates were some of the highest in the world. The local hospital, Mbale Referral Hospital, delivered something like 9,000 babies a year, which is the same as Liverpool Maternal Unit, which is the biggest maternal unit in Europe. So this one small sub-county in Uganda was delivering the same number of babies as basically a massive European hospital. So there's a huge demand for healthcare facilities that can kind of relieve some of that pressure. So this is one of our biggest projects to date, and one of the kind of biggest projects in which we worked with a local contractor. We weren't the main contractor on this one. We worked with HOK, who were the kind of healthcare specialists and filled the kind of knowledge gap that we don't have when it comes to designing healthcare buildings. M&E engineers, there was a really big team involved on this because of the complexity of the project. And it was a good example of a project that kind of tested working with a contractor in a more conventional way. As I said, a lot of the projects we are the main contractor for as well. So I guess when it comes to producing drawings and information, we don't have to produce so much information because we're the one building it. So we can essentially build a model and say, okay, well, we get how that works, then here we go, this is how we'll build it. But in this case, we had to issue a package of information and work with a Ugandan contractor and adapt to what kind of level of information is appropriate to get the design across and that kind of fits with the context. And I think it was maybe something like 250 drawings were submitted. And the contractor said, this is about 235 more drawings than I would ever have for a project. So what actually ended up happening was that, despite all these technical drawings, we did a lot more sort of visuals and tried to convey the design through kind of more visual representation, and that was the way in which the kind of project was built. So it was a good project to test that kind of working relationship with local contractors as well. This was the Shiala kindergarten in Zambia. Again, I think this was completed in 2022 as well. This was a Shiala school where the charity had previously built some classrooms and expanded the size of the school, but I think it was in 2020 the Zambian government brought in legislation that said that every school had to have a kindergarten to be registered as a school of a certain kind of stage. So the charity wanted to come back and build the kindergarten, so it was a space that would give 60 early years learning kids opportunity to gain a nursery education. But it was also a project where, like a lot of our sites, we were hiring a labour force that was a sort of 50-50 male-female split. Often in some of the contexts in which we're working, gender biases within the construction industry are very prevalent. I mean, they are even in the UK, but perhaps more so in some of the other locations that we're building in. So we felt it was important to try and lead by example by hiring in an equal workforce on site. And I think also important because it was a school project that lots of young women and girls that went to the school were able to see that there were strong, capable women working on the site, often actually in most cases doing better jobs than some of the men that were on the site as well. As I mentioned previously, we kind of moved also a bit into the art space, into looking at how temporary installations can not only reduce their environmental impact as an installation, something that is there for only a short period of time, but that also start to question maybe social or environmental issues a bit close to home. So this was the Feelings Library, which was located in Shoreditch a couple of years ago. It was basically an installation aimed at trying to combat mental health, especially coming out the back of the pandemic. It was like a library space where there was a number of books, and each one had like a prompt on the spine, and you could take it out. And the idea was that you went and sat in there, and you could read what other people felt or were writing, and then you could write your own thoughts and feelings as well. So, and it was also something that was built entirely from compostable materials or second life materials. So all of the structure and the fixings from this project are going to be used in a school workshop in Peckham, which is where they live at the moment. So trying to, as I say, think about the second life that design build installations have. This is a project which kind of gives a bit of an example of economic impact locally. It was the Errata Lookout Cafe, which was also completed in 2022. It was a project which was kind of, again, also born out of the pandemic, located in Fiji, a country which has a massive portion of their GDP is the tourism industry, and obviously COVID had almost flattened that entirely. So really hit the GDP in a big way. And so there was, I think it was the US Embassy were issuing grants to local projects that would be able to promote domestic tourism and give economic opportunities for domestic tourism. So we were approached by the Errata community and Savi Savi Rotary Club. They managed to get some of this funding and wanted to build a cafe at a prominent kind of lookout spot. So this town here is Savi Savi Town, and there's an unbelievable, obviously it's nighttime here, but you can't quite see it in this photo, but there's an unbelievable view across the bay to Savi Savi, and it's somewhere that domestic tourists and just travellers stop to kind of take in the view on the journey between Lambasa, which is the other town on the island, and Savi Savi. And so they wanted to take advantage of this site, but also due to the high number of footfall and visitors, there was a lot of littering and loitering that went on there. So they wanted to have this project there to kind of stop some of that, but also provide an economic opportunity to the Errata community. So this has now been operational since, so we finished this sort of end of 2022. It's been operational since roughly the start of 2023. And then now doing about 7,000 to 9,000 Fiji dollars a month in kind of sales, and all of that income goes to the community, and it's entirely run by the community as well. So really good to see that some of that kind of local tourism is now starting to take effect, and they can use that turnover and money to fund other community projects. Ramwa School, this was an example of a project that tried to combat some of the complex climate issues that we're facing. We've actually done a subsequent project to this since. I should have updated the slide with that project perhaps, but which is called Tambok Project, which we finished last year. And that was also on the same island, about a couple of hours away from this village, which had a very similar issue. And that was that because of the altitude that the village and building and school sits at on the site, they've got really high humidity and high moisture content in the air all year round. And so their previous classrooms would have like condensation on the blackboard at all times. All of the library books that they had would get really sodden and like unusable in a really short period of time. And the charity that were working with both of these villages were sending like reams and reams of learning materials out there, and they were just not lasting. So they came to us and said, look, we've got this kind of weird climatic contextual issue that we want to solve, but obviously it's not a case of sticking a dehumidifier and an aircon unit in there. We just can't do that. There's no power in the village. So how can we do this kind of through natural means? So we worked with some environmental designers at Cardiff University to come up with some kind of natural strategies. So one of those, which we employed on both this project and the Tambok project, was the library space on here, which is just behind this wall, was wrapped in iron roofing, which we painted black. And so the idea was that as the sun shines in it throughout the day, the heat in the space, or the black roof sheets radiate heat into the space. That lowers relative humidity within the air, within the library. And then when you couple that with lots of natural ventilation, so you have kind of openings at low level and high level, this moisture-rich air is then sucked out of the building. So essentially taking moisture away from the books that would otherwise hang around. That, as well as, I mean, you can kind of see it in action here. I guess we made it a bit more effective on the Tambok project, but trying to increase the spacing around the books, so putting these like bamboo dividers between them. So obviously still quite a lot of books there, so I don't know how effective that is. But also, and again, you can't see it in either of these photos, but all of the offcuts of timber that we used from that project, we kind of like stacked up and used that as the walls, internal walls within the library. And the theory is that end-grain timber sucks in moisture and acts like a bit of a sponge, so taking more of the moisture out of the space and then evaporates over a long period of time. Since this has been in use, which has been since 2020 now, we've been monitoring moisture levels in the space, and they've been showing at about 30%, sort of 20 to 30% less moisture reduction in the space, which is really good. And we've also now got monitors in Tambok, which is the more recently completed one. We hope to see a kind of even bigger reduction on that, but it's kind of too early at the moment to get trends in the data. This project was in Indonesia, completed in 2023. Yeah. It was a mushola and a prayer space in a community in Indonesia. And actually this one was an interesting project because the charity wanted to do the project as a way to promote kind of religious acceptance within the community. Historically, there had been a number of kind of radicalized individuals that had come from the area and had actually been to prison for that, and then had been kind of reformed and come out of prison. And they wanted to do the project because it would involve Western students and participants coming to work on the project in collaboration with local people to show that we can work together and in harmony and try and bridge some of that gap and gain more religious acceptance. So it was a project where the space itself wasn't necessarily the need for the project, and it was more the kind of process that was the important thing with that project. And actually we are returning back this year to Indonesia to work with the same organisation. Part of the use of this space, in addition to being a kind of prayer room, was that they put on like educational workshops. They do a lot of entrepreneurship workshops with women in the community. And they've seen a massive uptick in the number of people wanting to do those workshops since the building. And so they all therefore now want to build some kind of guest houses so that they can host longer term workshops that are more than just a day. People can then come from further afield within Indonesia, and any income they gain from the guest houses then funds those programs. So we'll be returning there to build some guest houses on this site as well. I mentioned earlier that we've kind of started to work more in the UK as well on educational workshops with school kids, anything from primary school all the way up to this example here, which is Sydney Stringer. They were some kind of sixth form kids. The workshops are basically aimed at trying to give the people we're working with a bit of an insight into what career in the built environment looks like. So essentially the people that are engaged in the workshop decide the brief for the project, they go through the design process, everyone's allocated like a role, project manager, quantity surveyor, designer, contractor, whatever it is. And then we run through the project and everyone switches roles as they go and gets a bit of an idea about what it means to work in the built environment. And the reason for doing those workshops is that we're trying to give better opportunities to schools and children who might be kind of first generation university applicants in their families, and trying to create more diversity and spur on more diversity within the built environment. So I think we've done maybe 8 of these workshops across the UK now. We've done a number in South Wales. This one was in Coventry, and we're working with schools in London as well to do more of those. Often quite obviously a small scale and a more manageable scale than some of our kind of international builds. I think this is maybe one of the last examples of projects, but moving again further into the kind of art space, but looking at how built interventions can kind of make commentary on social issues that are existing at the moment. You might have seen this on social media or in the news. It gained quite a lot of media attention, but it's the Skip House. It was basically an artistic commentary on the kind of cost of living crisis, and Harry, my business partner, moved into the skip. He's now been there for over a year actually, and still lives in the skip. It's still based on the site in London, and he's going to live there for another 2 or 3 months, and then we don't know what we're going to do with it, but or where he's going to live either. But he is planning another similar sort of project, which hopefully you'll hear about soon. But again, trying to shine a light on some of the kind of social issues, cost of living crisis, housing crisis that the country faces, but through maybe a more light-hearted intervention that involves design and build. And then I think finally, this is the last example. I said we were kind of moving more in towards kind of social entrepreneurship, and this is the first of those projects. It's a self-developed project, I guess, where we're the developer, contractor, and designer, and eventually the operator as well. But it's looking at basically creating a series of spaces all around the world which are built for remote working and co-living, but also importantly that each of those spaces will then host entrepreneur workshops and workspace for local entrepreneurs and local businesses. So essentially trying to create an international and local community of remote workers where we can share ideas about business and try and provide support to local businesses as well. So the first of which is, the business is called Change Space, but the first of which is going to be in Fiji. We're just trying to source a site for it now and get things up and running a bit later this year. So that is a bit of a whirlwind of an example of a number of the different projects we're working on. As we kind of grow as a business or an organisation, we're trying to diversify the kind of work that we do, but also trying to maintain that thread of social, environmental, economic impact throughout all of our projects, no matter where it is or what it is. I think the last 2 slides now are about project evaluation. I think for us it's important to obviously deliver the projects we're working on, but then to keep revisiting them and keep understanding and analysing how they're being used, and then constantly questioning how we can then further improve on the work that we're doing, both as developers or designers, contractors, whatever it might be. So this is an example of one of those projects at Nweni Kindergarten, which we built. It's actually one of the first kind of full-scale buildings that we did after we did a series of playgrounds back in 2015, 2016. It was a school in quite a remote location in Fiji. They had a small kindergarten which had about 8 kids, and they were all in the old school canteen. It was quite dark and dimly lit. It wasn't a purpose-built kindergarten, so it was not really a good space to learn in. But we went there and built a dedicated kindergarten classroom space, which saw the attendance rise to over 30 kids, and actually the teachers were then having to turn kids away to say, no, we haven't got capacity for you. And through revisiting that project and trying to understand how the space was being used and what some of those kind of outcomes were, obviously great that it had grown in attendance, but now actually they needed an even bigger space. And one of the kind of knock-on effects of that, as I say, was that they were turning away students. So we then looked at how can we respond to that. Well, we can build another classroom, but we'll also now over-egg its capacity so that they have the future capacity to build and to grow into that space. They actually hired another teacher as a result, and have kind of grown the kindergarten to its capacity now. Every year that we go back to Fiji, we revisit all of these projects, and it's great to see that they kind of get taken on and loved by the community that they were meant for. Actually, both of these buildings now are painted a plethora of multicolours, and they've got loads of artwork and stuff in them. They're really well loved, which is great to see. Again, actually it's not in either of these photos, but through going back and visiting the project, we noticed that one of the results of the kindergarten was that the parents would come after school, pick up their kids, and they would all wait around this one tiny tree which had like no shelter under it. And obviously in Fiji they get quite heavy rainfall sometimes, and so they were either in the really heavy rain or in the blaring hot sun. So we designed this little kind of tree shelter structure that went in when we built the second kindergarten as well, to give them a more dedicated space to wait for their kids at the end of the day, and that became a bit of a play feature as well. So yeah, as I say, constantly trying to revisit, understand the space's use, accepting where things didn't go to plan or where they did go to plan, and then building on that to keep improving designs in those contexts. So I think my last two slides now. Obviously, as I mentioned, we operate a lot of kind of construction workshops all over the world. We currently have a number that are open to apply to for students like yourselves. We get architecture students, fully qualified architects, engineers, maths teachers, all sorts now attending from universities and countries all over the world. So it's really great to get that kind of melting pot of international people on site and working together, and it's a really good atmosphere. So if you're interested, then check out our website. And then a final shameless plug, follow us on Instagram if you want to. Thanks for listening.
Thank you all so much for coming. We hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Josh, for holding this lecture for us. Our next lecture will be the week after Reading Week. We'll be having Studio Bart come in to talk about activist architecture. I hope you will make it to that. But thank you all very much.
Questions?
Oh, does anybody have any questions?
How does mailing work in the skill?
Mailing.
Yeah.
That's a good question, actually. Actually, I know, I'll tell you how it works. They all get delivered to our office, yeah. And they got, we work in a co-working space, and Harry gets like a lot of Amazon deliveries and stuff, and they definitely get quite annoyed about it. But yeah, he doesn't actually have a physical mailbox. So.
Anything else?
I have a quick question. In terms of like, I guess salaries and stuff, how do you guys work that out? Or where does that come from?
So I guess as we've kind of evolved over the years, I mean, for the first 4 years of doing projects, we didn't take any salary. We were still students, so we didn't necessarily have to, I guess. A lot of our upfront operating costs were covered by our student loans, basically. But as we've then evolved, it's a combination of being able to charge for the work that we do. I haven't necessarily talked about them so much here, but we do more commercial architecture projects, but generally still for clients and for projects that we believe can have a social impact. And that helps to fund a lot of our work as well, but also through kind of workshop fees and things like that, basically is where our income comes from. As we've also started to work on larger scale projects, I didn't include it in the slides here, but there was the maternity centre in Uganda. We're also doing quite a large secondary school in Uganda as well, which is just a much bigger scale project that we basically can't do in any other way other than to charge a fee as any conventional architect would. So it's been a bit of mishmash over the years, but I guess most of it now comes from kind of more conventional contractor and design fees, which are probably still a lot less than typically in the UK, but that's because of the context we're working.
I was just going to ask, how have you found it sort of as you've become bigger? And you were talking about how like you would send out emails for like projects to have, and then like now is it like just much easier for you guys to receive projects?
No, actually, we still spend a lot of time trying to source projects. I guess there's maybe more now that come to us organically, or people see it on the, I don't know, in the media, or just find our website and email us. That's probably still only 20% of the projects that we work on come to us that way. A lot of it is still us reaching out to various organisations. I think the more we've worked in this space, the more we found how much of a tiny circle it is, and come up against the same people or organisations or names a lot of the time. Obviously, I don't know if you've heard of Mass Design. They're quite a big player in this field, and they win a lot of work, basically. But I think we're trying to evolve that and trying to work with some of the kind of, I guess, larger scale funding pots and projects that, like UN and those sorts of establishments and organisations. But that also comes with a whole load of red tape and work that actually working with smaller organisations is doesn't have and is therefore more beneficial. But yeah, spend a lot of time reaching out to people still.
I believe that's it for questions there. So yeah, as I said, the next lecture will be the week after Reading Week by Studio Bart, looking at activist architecture and sustainability. So I hope that you'll all make it to that. But until then, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Josh.
Thank you.